Dance around the pot, James, and don't spare the horses.
All aboard!
It's showtime.
Indeed it is. Here we go. It is showtime, and we record this on the 11th day of December, a Thursday, and it is expected to be the day that the legislature takes off for its Christmas recess. And, at the end of the day, this will be the call. And they'll all head home. We're going to make good use of that anyway. So, yes, it is the final day of the legislature before rising for a 9-week-long Christmas recess. The House gets back to business February 17, 2026. So let's get around the table. Plenty to talk about here. We've got Keith Leslie joining us, a political analyst. You see and hear him on CHTV. Former Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, is with us. John Wright is the CEO of Canada Pulse Insights. And playing the part of Tim Hudak today, Brian Lilley is here from the Toronto Sun. So thanks for joining us, Brian. It's good to see you.
Do I have to pretend to be Tim?
Oh, yeah, completely.
I loved him in Batman.
Right.
Yes, and you have to be the optimist on this panel, apparently. So that's the deal.
Okay.
Just some thoughts. Brian, I'm looking at the legislative calendar here in Ontario. I realize we had an election this year, but the legislature only sat for parts of 13 weeks out of the entire year. I know they do business in committee outside of the work of the legislature, et cetera. But to me, that just seems like such a waste of time in so many ways that we didn't really get down to business. And then we get to this point in the legislative, calendar, and there's a real urgency to rush things through. And we've got these mammoth omnibus bills that just seem to touch on absolutely everything and anything. And we never really get around to any substantive conversation around important legislation that needs to go through the House.
Well, I would say that 13 weeks looks busy when you compare it to the feds, and they both sat very little this year for the same reason. Elections, long breaks. It can be a bit ridiculous. I'd be really annoyed if I was still working for you, Dave, and I had my old deal. So back when I was on Parliament Hill for News Talk 1010, I didn't get overtime, but I worked my butt off while the House was sitting, and then I took time in lieu in the summer. Well, there'd be no time in lieu to take at this point, and there'd be no overtime to charge. So I wouldn't get the summer off, and I'd be making very little money. I know we had.
And I should say, Brian, just for the record, those were the good old days. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I love that deal.
You got time in lieu in radio? Man, I didn't get that.
The Ford government, I know they ran on Protect Ontario, but I was discussing this with a friend over dinner last night. Like, what is their raison d'etre right now? What's their point? They don't seem to have a real and true focus on what they're trying to do. So does it matter if they sit? Well, from a public point of view, yes, absolutely. And I would just take issue with your statement that they do work in committees. I don't find that the committee work at Queen's Park is overly rigorous. Things just get shoved through. It's not where it should be. There's some committees that will work well together just because people are collegial, but other times it's just the government rushing things through, just like they do in the legislature. And so if they did sit, what would they do, I think would be my question.
Yeah, John, it just seems to be the eternal question. And if for other reason that it's detrimental to the opposition, in as much as the only time that Marit Stiles and John Fraser really kind of tend to make any headlines is when they're standing up in question period. Well, they're going to be away from the cameras for 9 weeks now.
Yeah, and I'll bet the government is really glad of that. I mean, they escaped from daily questioning on skills development fund. If you take a look at the polling over the last year, you find it kind of going, when we get to about February, March, it's about the same as to where they were at about 35, 36% after the election, where they actually moved up to the scale of about 50% in the polls. And they had held there for a while during the course of the summer because of the trade issues with Donald Trump. But that's now gone back down to where they were at election day. Sorry, I said 34. They were actually at about 48, I think, at that time. It was the premier's numbers, in fact, that were sitting at 34. It went up into even the 60s for a period of time, and are back down now to where they were for the premier's numbers, around 34%. So the party leads the premier. The premier, in fact, has been front and center on a whole lot of issues, ranging from bike lanes to speed cameras to Crown Royal to plant closings to a series of individual issues. And that's where I wanted to kind of join with Brian. I mean, we have a government that's in its third majority government. It's got an enormous amount of political capital. And I don't see any long-term thinking with the government. It's all very retail. It's been like this for 2 years or so, but I would have thought by this time we might have been into some different areas. I mean, we all know that there's some big issues, particularly with, as I've said before, growing and aging population. There's some other focuses that we could be taking in the province. There doesn't seem to be much thinking or think tank around any of these issues. It's all very, very retail. And so as a result, we've got day-to-day issues, which, you know, are the focus of the legislature. Government's going to get out of the legislature, leave Minister Piccini behind, maybe have a cabinet shuffle, in the next number of months, but it'll be February or March before they, I guess, head back. So in one way, not much has changed since the election, but you can see that the shine has come off the premier's support and approval process over the last 2 to 3 months, that he's been dealing in many of those choppy issues as opposed to something more strategic. Well,
Kathleen Wynne, when we look at this, and Brian makes the point around, the Fed's record and the long breaks and so on, does this not, sort of slow drip diminish the effectiveness first of the legislature, whether it's, Ontario? I mean, look at the number of times that Alberta is using the notwithstanding clause, and they've got all the recalls out for half of the caucus, it seems, for the Conservative government out there. You get at the whole legitimacy of the actual legislative assembly and the work that it's doing. It calls it into question.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it's especially true if that's the public discourse, that this government is, not sitting, they're not working, and I will say it always used to annoy me when there was, whether it was the summer break or the Christmas break, and the assumption that there wasn't work being done. When you're an MPP, it's not just the committee work. It's constituency work. There is a lot of work that gets done in the riding, and I think that is perfectly legitimate. But I have to say, I sat in the legislature with this government for 4 years, from 18 to 22, and in the first 2 years, or a year and a half, what this government existed to do was to undo the things we had put in place. Now, some of those they've had to reinstate, but their job, their mission was to turn back the clock on all the things that Dalton McGuinty and I had done. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, the tone changed, and the premier had a different mission. He had his teleprompter, and he was on a mission, obviously, to deal with COVID, which I think he did pretty well. But really, there was no theme, there was no vision, there was no agenda that this government came into office with in 2018. And I would say COVID gave them an agenda. And now what I'm seeing is they're back to reacting. There are things going on that they have to respond to because the work of government, like the Skills Development Fund that was in place, but they're having to react to the pushback against that. And I don't think it's at all clear what it is this premier wants to do in terms of a vision for the province. Cutting taxes is not a vision for governance. Cutting taxes is a strategy in order to do something else, but we don't know what that doing something else really is. So he reacts to things, and he interferes in municipal politics. I mean, the bike lanes, the speed cameras, all that kind of stuff. Again, reactive, and really kind of indicates how interested he is in the city of Toronto more than anything. So I think that he wants to be in the legislature as little as possible. I think that that's part of why the number of days is as low as it is.
They don't come back until February 17th, by the way.
Yeah.
68 days.
Yeah. It's
after
crazy.
Family Day.
Yeah. But Keith, when we look at this, it's easy to say, there's a problem here. There's the integrity of the legislature and the perception of it. And John points to the numbers, et cetera. But still, I think there's a certain malaise. There's a real fatigue, and it might have been partly contributed to by COVID. But I still get a sense that people are so kind of anxious about where we are vis-a-vis the economy, where jobs are, everything else, that the operation of government is really way down on their list of priorities and worries right now.
I think you're absolutely right there. And whether the government, takes a 9-week Christmas break after taking a 19-week summer break is just not heavy on their minds. They're seeing the premier out there. He's very good at getting out himself. The opposition leaders, as you point out, aren't getting the attention when the House isn't sitting. The premier is good at getting attention. He's out there pouring out bottles of booze or whatever he needs to do, putting out the Trump ads, that kind of stuff, being himself and governing on his own whims, as it seems at times. But they don't really want to be in the House every day where they're going to get called corrupt. And this charge seems to be sticking at this point. Every single day, there's more spills out about the scandal around the Skills Development Fund and the companies and people who've been getting grants from government when they really shouldn't have been. When the red flags were raised earlier about these particular people, about low-ranking applicants getting big grants from the government and higher applicants not getting it. All this, it's really beginning to percolate, I think. And even though the legislature won't be sitting until after Family Day, after today, the reporters are still going to be digging into this. I think there's going to be a lot more to come out about this, so they can avoid the legislature as much as they want, to avoid being called corrupt and to avoid Pacini answering any questions really at all on why he picked these applicants, other than they're all good, they all create jobs, even though we're not measuring how many jobs are being created. At the same time, though, the legislature is not debating, really, the government's move to private clinics to do hip and knee replacements. We're going to spend $125 million to private clinics and get half as many knee and hip replacements if we'd given that money to the public sector, the public hospitals. And there's very little debate going on this. The Ford government just keeps moving ahead with its privatization of service delivery in areas. This is a whole new area. Cataracts were one thing. Now we're going into hip and knee replacements. And just like the Schuldeis Clinic, these clinics will not take patients who have any other complication. It'll be one thing only. Anyone with any other conditions or issues, you're going to have to go to the public system. So the privates take all the money, none of the hard cases. And this is what we're doing here. And there's very, very little debate on that going on in the legislature. And I think that's a crime, because that's the kind of issue people will get upset about and will care about, regardless of how much of a malaise has set in since the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, Brian, I think the whole idea of this conversation ignited this week when the health minister announced, the intention to open these 4 clinics, $125 million, we're going to license them, et cetera. By the way, the Trillium reporting that this is all great, to have the increased spending, but the licensing of these facilities is lagging way behind. So to some degree, it's headline stuff. It's performative at one level. But the point being, to Keith's point, around the conversation and the debate, certainly there's no debate going on in the legislature. And then even the reporting I'm seeing on some of this is just kind of, off the side of the desk almost. To Keith's point, I mean, how are we going to manage this in terms of numbers? The other question that I don't see come up or addressed at all is capacity. We've only got so many doctors and healthcare workers who are going to be able to manage any of this. We're already talking about shortages in physicians. To move some of them into the private sector doesn't actually speed anything up necessarily. And if it does, I'd like to see the numbers.
Well, there isn't debate at the legislature on this, but there have been 2 elections where since they announced this, and whether it's because they didn't talk about it much or the opposition did a bad job of prosecuting this case, the public has just kind of shrugged and moved on. So, you know, where were the NDP and the Liberals on this? I mean, they did try and raise the issue, but not very effectively in the 2022 and the 2025 elections. And you're right, it is way behind because they started talking about this in 2021. They talked about it again in 22. It is going slower. Now, in terms of speeding up, I haven't talked to anybody on the orthopedic side, but when the eye care issue was going forward, I did visit clinics that were getting these licenses. I did speak to a number of doctors. There's one doctor in Ottawa who's the head of his department at the Montfort Hospital, and there were 6 of them to get access for a single operating room at the Montfort over 7 days. So that they would get 1 day of surgery each. He ended up partnering with one of the private clinics and was getting his patients through faster. So I think done properly, this can work. And yeah, as Keith pointed out, they're taking the easy cases, but that is by design. It's the government saying, you're going to do this so that people get through faster, and the complex cases will still go to the hospital where they probably should be, as opposed to the private clinic. But there's no debate on this because, I mean, Doug Ford is benefiting from something that every premier or prime minister wants, a really ineffective opposition. And I'm not sure why that's the case, because I thought Merritt Stiles was going to pop better than Andrea Horwath did. Horwath, by the time she left, seemed tired and disinterested. And Bonnie Crombie fizzled out far faster than I thought. So, you know, Doug Ford is benefiting on so many of these things from a weak opposition. Skills development is the first thing since the Greenbelt that may be able to stick. And if they keep pushing that for the next couple of months, maybe we will see something happen like in the Greenbelt, where a minister's fired and a bunch of changes happen. But for the most part, they, there were times when there would be actual problems and scandals, and the only thing the NDP would lead off question period with every day was Bill 124. And so, okay, well, are you the opposition or are you the official lobbyist for the public sector unions? You're supposed to represent the whole province. They just, I don't know if it's the team around Horwath and then Stiles, or maybe Doug Ford is just very lucky.
Well, that could be true, John. But I mean, when we look at the list of items that are, preferential in terms of concerns for Ontarians, healthcare's up there. So to be able to have this conversation, and we've talked about, the efficacy of having private delivery and the amount of private money that's already involved in the healthcare services. Everybody has, or many people have, benefit plans at work. That's all private sector involvement in the healthcare service, et cetera. So it's not like it doesn't exist. But the idea that somehow we're going to magically change the lineups and speed things up by having these in place, that's great to say, but I really would like to see how that's going to happen, because, again, I come back to, there are only so many doctors in the system doing that kind of work. So if we put them in healthcare, in private clinics or in hospitals, it doesn't necessarily change the equation all that much. I
suppose not. What was interesting to me was to see the interview that the health minister gave, rarely, I think, to John Moore the other morning when this issue was talked about. And I think she made some fairly decent points about, if we're going to be focused in on certain areas, cataracts, knees, hips, whatever, then in fact it creates an expertise that people are not paying anymore, that, they're using their OHIP card to go and get things done. She's very clear about the upselling potential that is now regulated very heavily. I don't think that the public really cares where they're getting this stuff done, as long as it gets done and it doesn't cost them any money. The issue for me, though, is the broader issue of the healthcare system. The connection with doctors, and as you rightly said, Dave, I mean, we do have 50% of doctors have indicated that they are going to be retiring in the next few years. That's a hell of a lot of firepower that's on the front lines now that they're going to have to go looking for. And I don't know where they're going to get that. I mean, we also have, I think when I was reading the other day, again, I admit I'm into the gerontology issues because they've always been fascinating to me, but I think there's 8 doctors specifically that deal with gerontology, and there's going to be a lot more that are going to be required. We have an issue where we've got to be focused on not only the fiscal issues and the infrastructure that we have, but the human resources issue is going to become relatively acute in the not too distant future. And I think, other than trying to attract people from the States to come up here and do their practices, or from Quebec now, again, there doesn't seem to be an overall arching strategy that we've heard on the primary care front recently from Jane Pitfield, from Jane
Philpott.
Philpott. And I think that's something that's going to become much more acute in the next period of time.
Well, Kathleen, back to John's point around the minister giving the interview, and I thought that was great. But, this question of capacity vis-a-vis the number of doctors in the system was not brought up in that conversation with John Moore. So to me, that's central here. I mean, based on the conversation we had last week about the Auditor General's report on the healthcare services and how we're recruiting and where we're
Dave,
putting...
can I just throw something in before you go to Kathleen? That doctor that I told you about that got 1 day in the operating room per week, you talk to any specialty and they'll tell you the same thing. They cannot get operating capacity in the public hospitals. So they've got time to be able to do this. So you are using the same doctors. You're not taking them away. They're doing operations in the public hospital, and then when they're not there, they're doing some in the private. That is the way it's supposed to go, is my understanding.
Sure. And if that anecdotally is how it's working, I'd like to see something that said we did the research and we found this out. I mean, good on you, Brian Lilley, for doing the work that I think government should have been putting out in front of us and saying, here's how this is going to work, Kathleen.
But I don't mean to jump in, but how often are those rooms being used to capacity? The hospitals are only using them from 6 a.m. till 2 p.m. They're available.
That's union rules. That's union contract rules. You can ask the former premier about.
Sorry, I jumped in on that.
No, that's okay. But what I was going to say is that I think in the conversation about the private delivery of these, I'm going to say private delivery of public services, because obviously I was in Dalton McGuinty's government when the eye clinic was set up, the Kensington Eye Clinic, and I understand the theory of that. You've got a center of expertise, it's public dollars, and people can access the service more quickly. I get that. But at the same time, there has to be a strategy for bolstering the public system, because to the capacity issue, Dave, if we start to see orthopedic surgeons leaving the public system, and Brian, I take your point about a hybrid model, but I also think that there's a possibility that you will see physicians leaving the public system and going to the private system. That's not okay. And so there has to be adequate funding and resources in the public system to keep it healthy, if I can say, as these other options are set up. And I don't know what the guardrails are about upselling and what the requirements will be when people go to these private clinics. When I listened to that interview, she didn't really talk about specifically what those would be. I mean, she said there would be some safeguards, but we need to know how that's going to be monitored, so that when people walk into one of these clinics, they're not going to be told they have to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, the other thing about Shouldice is not only do they take the easy cases, they also require a stay at the hospital that is on top of the cost of the actual hernia surgery. So all of those things have to be taken into account. And I don't think that this government has been clear at all about how they are going to, in the first case, yes, the Jane Philpott's work, make sure that people have primary care providers, but also that hospitals and providers in the public system have the resources that they need. You can hear ads run by the Nurses Association, the Nurses Union on a daily basis. You know, there are shortages. You talk to nurses, they don't have what they need in the hospital. So is that part of this strategy? I haven't heard that.
Just for the record, I was stir crazy when I was at Shoaldice, and so I decided I was not going to stay the full stay after the operation.
But did you have to pay for it anyway?
We did, yeah. And my wife was at the time was a healthcare executive, and that's the first thing she said. What the hell are we doing here? You're staying, and you don't have to be in there. So there was that added cost. But anyway, I throw that in just anecdotally. The headline this week, OPP confirming that there's an investigation into the company that received money from the Skills Development Fund. It's kind of interesting to me, John Wright, that this keeps coming at the government, and the government's just the premier holding the tiller firm there. He's just not moving the boat one way or the other.
Yeah, I don't know what else you would do if you had December the 11th as the date that you were shooting for to get out of the house. I mean, we talked about this 3 weeks ago, and I think the consensus was that they would probably hang in, carry the ball as much as possible. Maybe after in the next month or so, think about shuffling the cabinet, getting fixed on other issues to start to move forward. But day in and day out in the House, and given the fact that it's such a large issue of how many people got the funds, where they got the funds, the many companies, I mean, this could go on and on and on. So I don't know how they will get out of it if the NDP want to continue to make it an issue. But it's clear that there was a strategy here, and that was to just hang on to the sides of the decks as the ship went through some choppy water and wait until they could get out of the House and into the next year. I would say, though, I mean, I had a good conversation with Deb Hutton the other day on News Talk 1010, and I mean, her premise was that the scandal hasn't really had that much of an impact on the government's numbers, and the only thing I said was, yeah, they have to a degree. They've incentivized the NDP. And secondly, it has had, I think, an impact on the Premier's own numbers. But what it's done is it's distracted from everything else that the government is doing. This week alone, there was a deal reached with the Energy Minister with 5 separate Indigenous bans on electricity that would be taken from Southern Ontario and put up into the north, putting that infrastructure in place for Ring of Fire, and also in terms of making sure that parts of the northern area are ready for development. And that was just lost in the shuffle. I would say that was, for me, one of the most significant announcements of the week. And as a result of what's going on, it just distracts every single day from the overarching potential of reframing the government in other ways.
Well, Keith, the idea that the OPP has stepped up and said that they're going to investigate this further, keeping in mind that it started with a routine audit, then was referred to a forensic audit. The forensic audit said it should go to the OPP, and it went to the OPP. So this has been a long-running issue with this one particular file. But still stories this week that the feds or the Ford government gave $2.5 million to a guy who was associated with companies that got the funds, but he was under scrutiny from the Ontario Securities Commission. So this is getting out beyond these are just Doug Ford's friends now.
As I said, the reporters are going to keep digging into this, especially now that the legislature's not sitting, and they're going to start looking at every recipient of these skill development fund grants and other government grants, because there's one company you referenced, some of theirs came from a college funding grant, a different program, then they got skills development funding. All of this to say I'm not overly encouraged the fact that the OPP have been called in, other than they actually have a forensic audit to work with. Because remember, the OPP looked into the Greenbelt scandal a couple of years ago. They spent months and months in doing that and then said, we're going to give it to the RCMP. We can't handle this. We're not clear why they couldn't handle it, but they can't handle it. So they gave it to the RCMP, and we've had nothing but crickets since then. And that's over 2 years ago now that Greenbelt scandal went on. So I'm not really hopeful that the scandal around the skills development fund that the police investigation will uncover anything other than perhaps bad accounting by this one firm. We need a broader look into the whole skills development fund, whether that's a parliamentary inquiry, a royal commission, something, because billions of dollars is actually going out, and the reason for it, as the Auditor General said, is not clear, transparent, or accountable. Winners and losers are being picked here by the government, and the ranking system by the neutral civil service seems to have put a lot of the recipients at the lower end of the scale, and the people that were ranked high got nothing, or the applicants that were ranked high got nothing. This government, I don't think, is fearful of the police investigations because they take so long at this, and no one is really looking into the broader thing of the whole skills development fund, who got what and why did they get it. And I think that's the kind of investigation that will stick with this government. But overall, to Brian's point earlier, there's no opposition to really score the points here. The NDP did try hard in this fall session, this short fall session, to bring home, the gravy train keeps going. They're hammering home on the skills development fund, but it doesn't seem to be getting them very much traction at all.
Well, the one,
Dave,
go
can I
ahead.
just jump in on this, because I really think Keith is making the critical point, which is that I said earlier there was no theme or vision for this government. There is a theme. One of the themes is that people who are close to Doug Ford and the people around him are going to do better than other people. And so whether it's the Greenbelt or whether it's the skills development, that's the issue that I think needs to be looked at. And the fact that the OPP is not, they're not being asked to look at that. It's this one company. It's that broader issue that needs to be dealt with, because when bureaucrats come up with objective criteria for making a decision, that is sort of a very important aspect of the neutrality of these kinds of programs, because otherwise, if you don't have that, if you don't have those criteria, then they are just wide open for abuse. And so, I think that's the issue that we should be talking about, because it's a theme that runs through a number of the actions of this government.
Let me ask you a question then. I mean, who would look at this in a broader context? It's okay to say, well, there should be a water look at this, there should be a royal commission, there should be, no government's going to appoint it to look at themselves. They have a majority. They're going to be in power for the next three or so years if they want to continue this way. So outside of the reporters and the opposition, there's no way in which that's going to be done.
No, I agree that it's a challenge. Unless you appointed some entity to take a look, I don't have an answer for that, John. But I do think that the discourse around this should be about that. It should be about what Keith was talking about, rather than us spending a lot of time on the individual companies. The individual companies add up to the bigger issue, but I think that the opposition, the commentariat, needs to be raising the flag on that broader issue. Like, how do you get favors from this government? Well, you get them by being friends of the premier or friends of the ministers. And that should be something that we all think is outrageous. And I just feel like that's not where the conversation goes. It goes down a rabbit hole under one company or one specific, and then we stop talking about it. And I think that is, I think that does a disservice to, it does a disservice to government practice in general. It certainly does a disservice to the work of the civil service, but it does a disservice to the broader public as well.
Well, Brian, you brought up the stickiness of this file vis-a-vis it may be hurting the Ford government. What I found interesting is recently there was some polling done. It's a fairly significant number of people who are aware first of this issue, and the number of conservative voters who are concerned about it is fairly high. So it may not be a good or solid opposition that's going to be effective here. People are paying attention.
If I was the Ford government, I'd be leaning into the fact that the OPP were called in. And I'd be saying, see, I called the police. We gave it to them. Because otherwise this is going to come back on them, much like the Greenbelt did. And the Greenbelt, the government only decided to reverse course on that when their voters started to feel that there was something icky that it happened. When their voters were like, to what Kathleen was saying about, is it people that are all close to the Ford government getting favors? Is this corrupt? That's when they acted, and not before. And I have to give a shout out to the Trillium. They've done great work on this. They really got it going. And I ran into Charlie Pinkerton in the hallways over at the Ledge, and I said, "Wow, were you guys just?" Because the audit, they started dropping their reporting on this around the time the Auditor General's report came out. And I said, "Were you guys just waiting for that?" And he told me no, they'd been working on this for a long time, and it kept getting put off by other bigger stories. And then the timing was just fortuitous that they had all these FOIs and all this information ready to go when the AG's report came out. So great timing for the Trillium, horrible timing if you're in the Ford government, because it has been nonstop drip, drip, drip. There's no smoking gun. There's no huge aha. It is just a collection of things that look bad. And some of it, on the face of it, does appear to be bad, and some of it is just optics. At a certain point, the public doesn't care. It's the perception. And so, watch that polling, Dave, because if it starts eating into their own support, you'll see something happen. If it doesn't, they're just going to hope that this fades away.
Yeah. So what do you think is more likely then, Keith? Is that we're going to see some kind of tinkering with the Skills Development Fund, or the minister gets moved between now and Family Day?
So a little bit of tinkering, maybe, but quite frankly, the smell from this has turned into a stench and is becoming all pervasive. And if the Trillium and the other reporters keep up their work on this, it's going to keep the drip, drip, drip. To Brian's point, there may be no smoking gun, but the smell accumulates, and as it grows and grows, the public will become more aware, especially if conservative voters become more and more aware of what's going on, because it just, on the face of it, does not look good. Your government is picking winners and losers, ignoring all the criteria that were set by the neutral civil service, and your government appears to be very, very close with a lot of these winning applicants, whether it's the lobbyists, including one, the Premier's campaign chair got $100 million in contracts from the Skills Development Fund for his clients. These sorts of ties that go right into the Premier's office, let alone into the Minister's office as well. Whether Minister Puccini is long for his position or not, I don't think really matters. I think it's the Ford government itself that's going to have to answer for this. Unless Premier Ford, he's very good. He was good in the Greenbelt about saying, hey, we went too far. We shouldn't have. We moved too fast. I'm sorry. We won't do that again. Unless he comes up with one of those mea culpas and admits that there were problems with the way this money was handed out, I think the opposition and the reporters are going to just keep hammering away, and it's going to be a drip, drip, drip until the government is forced to respond. But I don't think shuffling the minister out will do the trick. I really don't.
And it's not as simple as the Greenbelt to reverse, right, Keith? I mean,
No.
it's not like you just flip a switch and say, okay, all that land's going back into the Greenbelt. And I think to John's point, I've just been sitting here thinking about what you could do. I mean, it's not like, if you look at what's happened with the EQAO tests, I know this is going to sound like a leap, but Paul Calandra has said he's going to appoint, Minister Calandra has said he's going to appoint a couple of people to look at what's going on with the EQAO testing and why the kids aren't doing as well. That doesn't work in a situation like this. Like, what third party is going to come in and look at this that's going to give the government advice that the bureaucracy hasn't already given them? That's the problem. The bureaucracy already told them how to do this, right?
Could the Integrity Commissioner look into this?
Yes, I think, Brian, that is a possibility. But, the Integrity Commissioner looks at things and it doesn't really necessarily lead to a systemic change. It can be individuals. There isn't necessarily a systemic issue that can be pinpointed.
I would, if they were my client and the government is not a client of mine, I would probably give them 3 pieces of advice. The first is to actually move Minister Calandra probably into that role in the next. No, to move Calandra into that role. I mean, he's in education right now.
It would be great to have him out of education. That would be terrific. Good idea, John.
I'm thinking, I'm just being theoretical here.
Yeah.
And the reason is because every issue that he seems to take on, he is able to dissipate all the fire around it. I mean, he's had almost every issue in the House as House leader. He's managed to settle it down. He's managed to get them back on track. So, I mean, there needs to be somebody in that role who can actually change the discussion on that. You've got a number of months to do that. But in order to do that, it's the second piece of advice. you've got to have probably 2 or 3 other things that squeeze all of that out. And this government doesn't have the 2 or 3 issues that before, when Trump was, talking about the 51st state and the trade relationships that were focused on Ontario a lot. It managed to take up all the air in the room, and it forced all of those issues to the side. The government doesn't have those 1, 2, or 3 issues in order to do what they need to do, is to force that off the table. And the third thing is the premier doesn't have to respond to everything. I always remember Jean Chrétien would go for a period of time where his numbers would be really, really good, and then it would start to drop. And what would happen is that he would kind of disappear for a month. You wouldn't hear him commenting on, the day-to-day things. He'd put his ministers back in front, and his numbers would go up. The problem with the premier responding to all of this is that he wears it every day. And I think, again, if you take a look in the last 3 months or so, he tends to be off track on so many retail issues that we're missing the bigger strategic elements of the government. So the 3 issues that I would have: find somebody for the portfolio who can probably address it better and move it off. And if that means a broader cabinet shuffle in the spring, then so be it. But secondly, I think that you've got to have, 2 or 3 other issues that you can have the agenda on, that you can turn to a different station and turn up the volume. And the government hasn't done that. And thirdly, I do think that the premier doesn't have to be involved in all of these issues. His own personal numbers are down by at least 10 to 15 points from where they were only a few months ago. And I think the more he's in front of the cameras dealing with these retail issues, the more his numbers are going to continue to be in that lower register.
Well, we like to say on this show that we recorded it specifically on the morning of December the 11th. That's a Thursday, and things may have changed by the time you hear or watch this. But then again, some things just won't. We've got the Eglinton Crosstown not opening now until 2026. I think there's probably a pretty robust over and under bet on that. And it occurs to me, Brian, that the folks who actually are building the arena for the Milan Olympics were probably somehow imported from the Metrolink project.
No ice.
This is the biggest hat. It was April 2023 that I was at the Davisville Yard. And that's when we finally got Phil Verster to admit what I had already reported, because they would never confirm it. And so we just put it in the paper anyway. I had enough people saying it was true that they had mislaid some of the tracks. And so he finally addresses that, but still says, well, we're doing a 30-day review, and then we will be able to tell you when it's opening. That was April 2023. It will be almost 3 years from then before it opens, because it'll be January or February sometime. So this thing's been a disaster forever. The government had to tell Verster that he wasn't allowed to tell the media anymore when the thing was going to open, because he kept going out and then he would miss it. I mean, I think he'd been saying since 2021 or 2022, every couple of months he'd be like, well, it'll open in a few months. And of course it hasn't. Do we need a public inquiry into this the way we did into Ottawa? Perhaps, although some of the same names are going to show up because it was a lot of the same people, including a consulting firm out of Ottawa that seems to be in the middle of their disastrous LRT and this one. But, I don't know how they don't wear this more. I know it started before you were Premier, Kathleen, Dalton McGuinty and Rob Ford. I love that photo of the two of them at the groundbreaking. That's how long we've been building this thing. And I love
guess who was the Minister of Transportation, Brian?
You. and then Mr. Del Duca. And, and I've talked to Stephen about this, and he's told me, well, it's really complex, and, didn't understand how complex it would be. We built the channel. Well, we didn't, but the Brits and the French built the channel in 5 years, and that goes under the English Channel. This has been problematic, and neither Metrolinx nor any of the governments, and I'll put this all the way through on all of them, have been upfront about the problems, like what really did happen at the intersection of Yonge and Eglinton.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I talked to guys who were working on that project, and they said, okay, well, here's the plan. And they went in and they looked at the blueprint, and it was nothing, resembled nothing as to what the infrastructure looked like underground. Now, the argument was, well, when they were building it, they had to change things on the fly. So the old blueprints don't reflect that. Surely to God, somebody updated that, you would have thought, between now and then. They didn't. So a lot of that work, Keith, was sort of done in the rearview mirror, and the water tables, all of that nonsense that went on. And these are guys who were pros at this. This is the first time that they had seen this coming, thinking, "What the hell? How do we do our job blindfolded?"
All of it, the whole thing. If you have going on that many years over budget, over time, and the one question I have now after witnessing the LRT launch in Finch last weekend is, how fast will the Crosstown be, or how slow will it be? Because quite frankly, having light rail rapid transit when it's not rapid is not going to do the job. I know there's some initial issues here, but are they going to be worked out before the Eglinton Crosstown?
Finch was down twice this morning.
Yeah.
So it sounded like Ottawa LRT already.
Same cars.
Oh, good gosh. It's just rather frightening what we're looking at here, because we waited so long for this particular, the Eglinton Crosstown. The whole city has been tied up waiting for this to happen. And if it's going to turn out to be another fiasco like what they've had in Ottawa, where it works some of the time, as long as the weather's really good, that's just not acceptable. And again, we don't have the traffic clearances, the lights. We're not giving them the right of way to go fastest through. That's some really piss poor planning by somebody at this point, let alone, as you say, what they found underground at Yonge and Eglinton, and didn't update the plan. I can't believe there's got to be updated blueprint plans somewhere. There must be, but apparently maybe not.
Michael Lindsay from Metrolinx did say that it would start out slow and speed up, that this is part of the plan, that as the system comes online, it will be faster. But
sure.
I thought that's what the 30-day testing was for.
Well, and I think it's worrisome that there, as you said, Brian, there are 2 shutdowns this morning. Surely to goodness that we have learned from what happened in Ottawa. Like I thought that there were lessons being taken from Ottawa and being applied both to Finch and to Eglinton Crosstown. I assumed that was part of the slowdown for the opening of the Eglinton Crosstown.
That's where they got the 30-day testing from, was from the Ottawa inquiry.
Yeah. So why we wouldn't have learned those lessons, I don't know. And I think there's also a bigger point, and this is a bigger conversation, but the partnership, the public-private partnership that was in place, and we put it in place. We changed it from the Harris model slightly, so that, well, majorly, so that the whatever was being built would stay in public hands. But I was talking to somebody who's done a lot of infrastructure work in the past, and they were saying that it's possible that we need to look at what these partnerships work for. They work for hospitals, they work for schools. They may not work for large transit projects. And having consortia like this may not be the answer for these big transit projects. So I really hope somebody in government, if I were in government right now, I'd be saying, okay, what is the fundamental thing that went wrong here? And is it the model of these partnerships? And, was it that there wasn't enough accountability on the part of one level of government for the project that meant that it was just not effective?
Well, it was a question though of how do you define risk in that model, right? In that procurement model, and so that when they got to that point, it was all very squishy when you get down to the actual details, because what's substantial completion and what all these phrases mean. This was all new in the P3 world at the time. So yes, I think you're right, Kathleen. But it's interesting to see where the Ontario line, they have gone with a modified P3 model to build stations as opposed to lay track or whatever else. They've sort of broken that up into various things as opposed to having one huge consortium deal with the whole thing.
Seems to be going better.
I suspect that is a direct result of what's gone wrong with the Eglinton Crosstown.
For sure.
But let me ask you a question, and to maybe all three of you. does not the Premier have the ability or receptivity on the other end to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, so what the hell's going on? Or the transportation minister. I mean, the public vacuum on all of this has been immense. No one has informed anybody what the real problems are or what the issues are. And it's clear that the consortium decided around the time Anne-Marie Aikens left that they weren't going to talk about anything. Like, it was just like, nope, we're just going to keep our heads down and we're not going to provide anybody with any information. And even if we do some kind of a press conference or a release of information, it's not going to refer to what is going on. But it seems, strange to me that everybody could dance around this and not have the answer to it. Is it not appropriate that those people would know what's going on? Because if I were sitting in the corner office as you were, Premier, I'd probably be making those phone calls. Or is it all about plausible deniability?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think we've talked on the show before about the kind of communications malpractice that's gone on. I mean, Brian, you're talking about Verster being told not to say what was actually happening. I don't know whether that's true or not, but the fact is nobody was saying what was going on. And that was a huge problem in terms of the whole narrative around the Eglinton Crosstown. And I can tell you, I mean, having been the Minister of Transportation, having been an MPP on the Eglinton line, trying to get answers out of Carolyn Mulroney, trying to get answers out of Metrolinx, it was a real problem. And so I think that there's a much better job that could have been done. And yes, John, the Premier does have the right to call and say what the hell's going on. And we have no evidence that he didn't do that. What we do have evidence of is that whatever the answer was did not get translated to the public.
Well,
maybe Metrolinx just doesn't have enough vice presidents. I mean, they're limited to what, 100?
I think that's the problem.
Clearly, they need one for comms or three or four. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Well, don't you think that, to John's point, it just occurred to me as he brought it up, who, everybody could have told you off the top of their head who was the spokesperson for Metrolinx. Anne-Marie Aikens comes to mind. I don't know who it is now. It's, to that point.
Is there one?
Well, here's the other thing, and this is anecdotal, but several of the guys I play hockey with either work for Metrolinx or TTC, and every week they come into the dressing room with their heads down because they found out about developments on the Crosstown by listening to the radio or reading it in the media. Nobody internally told them, we got to start the clock again on the 30-day trial or whatever it happens to be. So the whole mechanism around communications, whether it's external or internal, it seems, Brian, is just suffering badly.
Yeah, I'm not sure who the spokesperson is now. For a while, they were all former media colleagues of mine, either somewhere in Metrolinx or in the minister's office, and that's all changed. The last thing they need is another vice president of anything. Metrolinx, great idea, bad execution. Well,
the name that keeps coming up, though, Brian, this is Infrastructure Ontario, and this is Metrolinx, and I've said this before, is Michael Lindsay, and an IO has to play a role or carry some of the baggage on this because.
Well, I'll give Michael Lindsay credit for this. He's smoothing things over compared to Phil Verster. You were talking about trying to figure out risk earlier, and Phil Verster, and I'm not going to harp on him too much because if you've read my columns, you know that I've harped on him a lot over the years. When he was in leading Metrolinx, their response was to take all of the contractors to court constantly. So everything was just in litigation. You couldn't solve anything through a conversation is what everyone would say to me. So I'd love to know how much we spent on litigation to determine who pays for what in building the Crosstown. Michael Lindsay has been able to go in, calm things down, have a better relationship with the various members of the consortium, and move things along. So that's on the good side. But horrible comms on this all around.
Well, and again, I go back to Lindsay being at IO, and Verster wasn't there when this contract was actually.
No, he came in 2017.
Yeah.
After being thrown out of Scotland.
We were looking for a rail guy, Brian.
This is a problem. Is there's not many rail guys. There's not many. Do you go P3? Does the government build? There's only so many construction companies that can do any of this, and the rail world has been shrinking. I've got a friend who's, has done up some of the contracts on the various lines. The companies keep buying each other up, and what are we down to now? Just two real rail companies, Hitachi and Alstom now. Bombardier's out of it, and other companies have gotten out. Who do you turn to? It's the same as building a hospital. There's like three major companies. I've started seeing Graham on the some of the construction cranes around. They're a new player, relatively new player here. They're out of Western Canada. And I was speaking with someone in government who said, yeah, they're trying to find other companies that can do these projects, because otherwise it's just the same three, always getting the contracts and always delivering late and over budget.
Yeah, well, and again, I go back to IO. There's a role there for IO to be fixing this, and if there's a problem, I seriously think we need to be taking a closer look at that. All right, that'll do it for us. We'll be back again next week, the final session before we take our Christmas break. I don't know if we'll take a 3.5 months or whatever it is off, but we'll reset, we'll recharge. So thanks to Kathleen Wynne, John Wright, Keith Leslie, and we appreciate you jumping in at the last minute, Brian. It was good to have you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for joining us. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford, and enjoy your weekend.